The white of the suite at Memorial Hospital in Georgetown was so pure it felt aggressive. It was a clinical white that smelled of antiseptic and the expensive flowers that arrived every morning, sent by Mr. Richard Harrison's assistant as part of a public relations protocol. Sarah Miller felt the icy silk of the 1,000-thread count sheets under her fingers, an absurd luxury that only served to remind her that her comfort was a transaction. Across the room, by the window that offered a flawless but distant view of Washington, D.C., her husband was on the phone. His voice, a caress of steel, was discussing the terms of a multi-million-dollar merger. But between phrases, he dropped pearls of his discontent. Yes, an inconvenience. A biological asset that requires more maintenance than anticipated, she heard him say, referring to her and the son she carried in her 7-month belly. Every syllable was a micro-fragment of ice digging into her skin. This was the Faustian bargain her mother had signed on her behalf. When he hung up the phone, his small dark eyes, like 2 obsidian shards, settled on her. The silence that followed was dense, almost chewable. A young, pregnant wife projects virility, stability. It's good for business. She said nothing, just slipped a protective hand over the curve of her belly. The gesture, so instinctive and pure, seemed to flip a switch of contempt inside him. Your mother assured me you were docile, a blank canvas. But I see a will in your eyes that I find deeply distasteful. I hope it's just a side effect of your condition. He didn't touch her. His cruelty didn't need physical contact. It was atmospheric, an invisible pressure that compressed the air and stole her oxygen. The echo of his leather shoes on the marble floor was a countdown to the next humiliation. But at that moment, a familiar and dreaded sound came from the hallway, the sharp, decisive tapping of her mother's high heels. The architect of her misery was coming to inspect her work. Evelyn Miller entered the room not like a concerned mother, but like a gallerist evaluating a piece of art that wasn't behaving as it should. Her perfectly calibrated smile was directed only at Mr. Harrison. She ignored her daughter's paleness, the trembling of her lips, the anguish in her gaze. "Richard, darling, what a nightmare for you," she cooed, placing a bejeweled hand on his arm. Her own mother was labeling her as defective to her buyer. Evelyn then turned to the bed, and under Richard's gaze, her face remained falsely sweet. "Honey, thank your husband. He left his schedule to come see you. You should feel lucky." Mom, ... Sarah's voice broke, her expensive perfume invading Sarah's personal space, her smile now an icy grimace that only Sarah could see. "Listen to me carefully," she hissed, her voice a barely audible, venomous whisper. "It cost me a fortune in social capital and favors to get this deal. You're a Harrison. You have everything a woman could ever want. So stop whimpering, smile, be the perfect wife, and give this man the air you promised to give him. Don't ruin this. For either of us." The threat was as clear as the diamond on her finger. In the hallway, the security guard, David Campos, had stopped. It wasn't his intention to listen, but the intensity of that icy whisper had caught his attention. He remembered Sarah's father, Mr. Miller, an honest and kind man who had died too young. Before he died, he had given David his business card. "If my family ever needs anything at all, promise you'll call this number," he had said, pointing to a name and a phone number written by hand on the back. Matthew Sullivan, brother for life. David never knew why, but he kept the card. Now, as he watched Evelyn walk away, leaving her daughter devastated, he felt the weight of that old miss. He reached into the back pocket of his uniform, his heart pounding. He knew making that call could cost him his job, but he also knew that not making it would cost him his soul. In the heart of the financial district, in an office on the 50th floor of the Freedom Tower, his world was one of order, strategy, and power. A universe built on legendary legal intelligence and unwavering loyalty to a select. Sarah's father had been one of them. After his death, the relationship with Evelyn had cooled. Her superficiality and her social climbing at any cost repulsed him. His private phone, a direct line that only a handful of people knew, vibrated with unusual insistence. The voice on the other end was that of an ordinary man, a guard, but he spoke with the precision of an eyewitness and the conviction of a decent man. David didn't embellish the story. He recounted the facts with a blood-curdling rawness. The public humiliation, the mother's cruelty, the young woman's silent fear. Matthew listened, motionless, as a frigid, controlled fear began to boil in his veins. The promise made to his dying friend echoed in his mind like a thunderclap. Take care of her, Matthew. Protect her from the wolves, especially the ones who share her own blood. And he had failed. He had allowed distance and disdain for Evelyn to keep him blind. Room number? His voice was low, a harbinger of the storm he was about to unleash. After hanging up the office, once a haven of calm, became the command center for an imminent war. Mobilized his elite investigative team with a single order. I want to know every last dirty secret of Richard Harrison, and ordered his car to the door. As the private elevator descended at a dizzying speed, Matthew felt the weight of years of inaction. But that weight didn't crush him. It forged him into a weapon. The armored Lexus waiting for him wasn't just a car. Tall, with silver hair at his temples, and a look that held a quiet authority and a warmth she hadn't felt in years. He approached, pulled up a chair, and sat by her bed. He waited, his presence a solid and silent anchor. Your father would be devastated if he saw this, he finally said, his voice tinged with deep sadness. And I've failed you by not being closer. Sarah, through her tears, told him everything. When she finished, Matthew took a deep breath, his eyes lit with a combat light. Listen to me, Sarah. The foundation of your prison is built on a fundamental lie. Your mother told you your father left you broke. It's false. It was his guarantee that you would always be free. It was activated on your 21st birthday or your wedding day, whichever came first. Your mother knew she was counting on you never finding. The information hit Sarah with the force of a divine revelation. Marriage hadn't been her only option. It had been the only option her mother had allowed her to see. The money was there. Her freedom had always been within her, hidden behind a veil of deceit. That money is yours, Sarah. Enough for you and your son to not only survive, but to thrive. Far from them, Matthew saw the change in her eyes. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something new, rage and determination. He stood up. His decision was irrevocable. We're going to get you out of here right now, before they realize the game has changed. While the doctor prepared a discharge through a service route, claiming the need to move the patient to a calmer environment for her recovery. Every creak in the hallway was a pang of panic. Matthew guided her through a labyrinth of internal corridors, past steaming kitchens and noisy laundries. It was the hospital's underbelly, a world without marble or flowers, a real world. The fresh, polluted air of the DC night hit her like a blessing. An anonymous, functional sedan was waiting for her at a cargo exit. As she slid into the back seat, Sarah took one last look at the hospital's bright lights. It was more than a building. It was the mausoleum of her old life. The apartment in the heart of the Adams Morgan neighborhood was a sanctuary. It wasn't ostentatious, but every detail spoke of warmth and security. Books on the shelves, a wool blanket on the sofa, a kitchen that smelled of coffee. Matthew handed her a set of keys. Nobody in the world knows you're here, except me and my closest team. You're a ghost. Sarah nodded, the tears now from pure relief. She felt safe. But as she watched the city silently hum through the glass, a question formed in her. What would happen when the Titan discovered his most prized possession had disappeared? It wasn't a question of if there would be a reaction, but of how violent and destructive it would be. Richard Harrison's fury wasn't an explosion. It was a silent earthquake that shook the foundations of his empire. Upon discovering the empty bed and the irregular medical discharge, his first call was to Evelyn, a torrent of icy threats that left her trembling. But he quickly understood that this wasn't a tantrum from his wife or an oversight from his mother-in-law. It was an orchestrated attack. Handed him an envelope at the door of his mansion in Potomac. It confirmed it. Inside wasn't one, but 3 legal offensives. The first, an immediate restraining order. The second, a divorce petition for psychological abuse and coercion. The third, and the one that made the color disappear from his face, was a notification from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, a comprehensive audit of his main companies, initiated by an anonymous tip that detailed with surgical precision several suspicious operations. The name on the letterhead said it all: Sullivan and Associates. Matthew Sullivan, the ghost of his father-in-law's best friend, the piece he had never considered on his chessboard. The glass of single malt whiskey he was holding shattered against a Carrara marble wall. He didn't scream. His rage was too deep for such a vulgar gesture. He sat at his mahogany desk, his mind working at a feverish pace. This wasn't a battle for a marriage. It was a war for his survival. He picked up the phone and called his head of security, a former soldier with more loyalty than scruple. Find her. I want to know where she sleeps, what she eats, who she talks to. Put 24/7 surveillance on her. I want photos, recordings, everything. And then tell them the containment phase is over. Now we go for annihilation. For Evelyn, Richard's call was just the beginning of the end. Within hours, her world evaporated. The credit cards were canceled. The invitation to the museum gala was elegantly withdrawn. The friends who used to fawn over her no longer answered her calls. She was isolated, exposed, and terrified by the wrath of a man she herself had fed. Panic led her to make a mistake. Using an old favor, she got the address of the building in Adams Morgan. She didn't dare to go, but she called Sarah from a payphone, her voice a pathetic mix of pleading and threat. Sarah, for the love of God, what have you done? You're going to destroy both of us. He's a monster when he's angry. You don't know him. Come back. Apologize. I can fix this. No, Mom, you can't fix anything. Sarah's voice was calm, but it cut like glass. Because you're part of what's broken. I'm your mother. Everything I did was to protect you, to give you a better life. You gave me a gilded cage and called it a life, Sarah replied. It's over. Don't call me again. Evelyn heard the click of the phone hanging up and stared at the receiver. Her daughter's final rejection, the loss of everything she had sacrificed her own integrity for, pushed her into the abyss. In her twisted mind, the fault wasn't hers, but Sarah's for her ingratitude. And if she couldn't get her world back, she would make sure Sarah's burned down. She looked in her address book for the contact of a tabloid journalist, a man famous for not letting the truth get in the way of a good story. She offered him an exclusive, the heartbreaking story of a mother betrayed by her ambitious daughter. The media offensive was brutal. The Georgetown gold digger, the untold story, one portal had from heiress to viper, how Sarah Miller deceived a philanthropist. Another read, the stories fueled by Evelyn's half-truths and Richard's financial painted a toxic portrait. Sarah as a calculating manipulator who, after securing the pregnancy, had decided to go for the whole empire. Although Matthew assured her it was noise with no legal value, every headline was a wound. But Richard didn't settle for the public war. He wanted private terror. One afternoon, a package arrived at the apartment, addressed to Sarah, with no return address. It was identical to the one Sarah had secretly bought at a small boutique in Old Town on one of her few authorized outings. There was no note. It wasn't necessary. The message was chillingly clear. I know where you are. I know what you do. I know what you love most. And I can touch it whenever I want. Sarah's scream was a heartbreaking sound that alerted Matthew, who was in the study. He saw the shoe, and a fury he rarely showed hardened his features. Security was intensified to the level of a head of state, but Richard's goal had already been achieved. He had penetrated the steel and concrete walls and planted a seed of pure terror directly in Sarah's heart. The war was no longer for freedom, it was for survival. And Sarah realized that her opponent had no limits. He would stop at nothing to get her back, or, failing that, destroy her. On the other side, Sarah, with her pregnancy now very advanced, seemed a fragile figure. But her eyes contained a determination forged in fire. Richard's defense was a fierce attack, presenting Sarah as an unstable young woman, prone to fantasy and easily influenced. They called Evelyn to the stand. Her performance was masterful. Tears, a choked voice, the portrait of a heartbroken mother for a wayward daughter. However, under cross-examination by Matthew, her testimony unraveled, revealing a web of lies and a sick obsession with money and status. She looked directly at the judge. Her voice, at first a trembling thread, firmed with every word. Your Honor, my ex-husband's lawyers have spoken of contracts, of assets, and of my supposed character. I want to talk about silence. The silence of a dinner for two at a 20-foot table. The silence in the car after an event where I had to smile for hours. It doesn't leave marks on the skin, but it destroys the soul. She paused, taking a breath. My mother and my ex-husband believe everything in this world has a price, and it does. Freedom has a price. It's paid with fear, with loneliness, and with days like today. But I'm here to tell you that my peace and my sons are not for sale, not anymore. Her statement, devoid of artifice, resonated in the room with the force of an undeniable truth. He would announce his verdict the next morning. The final battle had been fought with words, but everyone knew that the sentence that was coming would be as powerful as a physical blow. The Miller family woke up early and had breakfast together in silence, accompanied only by the aroma of coffee and toast. Sarah distractedly caressed her belly while listening to the words of encouragement from Maria and the practical observations from Bob about the court schedule. John, serious and contained, limited himself to looking at his daughter with a mixture of pride and nervousness. He knew that day would mark a before and after in their lives, and he wished the judge would put an end to the uncertainty that had consumed them for months. The atmosphere in the house was sober, charged with expectation, but also with an air of quiet dignity. At the courthouse, the commotion was greater than on previous days. Journalists, photographers, and onlookers crowded the entrance, waiting to capture an image or a statement. Followed closely by her father and Maria, the echo of her heels on the marble of the hallway seemed to set the pace for the definitive day. The room was full. Richard, sitting on the other side with a tense expression, tried to maintain his composure, although his restless eyes betrayed his anxiety. The reading of the ruling was slow and clear. The judge declared Richard guilty of psychological coercion and of violating his ex-partner's privacy through illegal surveillance. He ruled that Sarah would retain full custody of her future son and would have protective measures in place. The sentence included financial sanctions and strict limitations on Richard's contact with her. Richard reacted with anger, standing up and protesting with jumbled phrases about conspiracies. The judge interrupted him firmly, reminding him to be respectful. His figure, once imposing, now seemed small against the weight of the truth. Sarah looked at him in silence and understood that the man no longer had power over her life. But it opens the door to a future where my son can grow up in peace. A spontaneous applause erupted from the crowd. Months later, under the starry sky of Phoenix, Sarah rocks her newborn son, John, in her arms. Her father's house is no longer a refuge, but a home filled with laughter. She has used the resources from the settlement to create a foundation that offers legal advice and psychological support to women who are victims of abuse. John, by her side, looks at her with a pride that overflows his soul. Maria has become a sister. The family, broken and dysfunctional, has been rebuilt on more solid foundations: truth, respect, and unconditional love. The story of her pain wasn't an ending, but the prologue to her true life. The trial wasn't the victory, but the confirmation of a battle she had already won within herself. And as the Arizona wind gently caresses the balconies, they all understood that what they had lived through wouldn't be etched as a wound, but as a luminous scar that would always remind them of the importance of justice, love, and shared strength.